Welcome to Unity Now, the podcast where we discuss unity in the face of division. Inspired by the Unity 2020 plan, we strive to unite Americans by highlighting the middle ground between the two dominant parties and promoting the individual over groups. Each episode, we will bring you exciting, well-informed guests and host nuanced conversations about politically charged subjects. Our goal is to bring an end to the ideological war threatening the collective well-being of this great country.
Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host tonight, Toby Davis, and today I'm pleased to be joined by Heather Shayne Blakeslee. Heather is founder and editor of the written publication Root Quarterly. She's a singer and likes politics. We'll get into that for sure. Heather recently joined Braver Angels and comes to us from Philadelphia. Hi, Heather.
How you doing, Toby? It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm doing great. We thank you for joining us. Before we get going, do you want to add anything to that introduction to tell our audience about you?
Sure. Well, I think it's probably important to know that I'm a native Pennsylvanian. So not only am I coming to you from Pennsylvania, this is actually the state that I grew up in, but I grew up in the middle of the state, which is a very purple area, obviously. So I think that's one of the reasons that I'm attracted to, the unity movement, places like Braver Angels, because it's allowing space for conversations across political divides. And I've been working in nonprofit management, small business management for environmental arts organizations, social justice organizations for 25 years. So this is also the organizing space is the space that I've been in for a really long time as well.
Fantastic. Yeah. And we said at the outset, you started the publication Root Quarterly. You were kind enough to send me a few copies. So there you go, everyone. And, I really want to know what got you into starting, a publication and why a print publication. And I love the line on the back. I think I told you this. You say, "Print is dead, long live print." So tell us about that and what got you started with Root Quarterly.
Sure. So one of the as I just said, one of the jobs that I've had for a really long time is doing nonprofit management. And I found myself at a small publishing company a little while ago, a couple of years ago. And one of my jobs there was being COO of the company. We had a bunch of music titles. One of them is Magnet magazine. So if you've ever watched the movie High Fidelity, that's what John Cusack is reading in his record store. They also publish a heavy metal magazine called Decibel magazine, if anybody knows that. And I was the editor for their sustainability title, Grid, which I really loved doing. So in all of the work that I've done over the years, learning how organizations work, businesses work, publishing was one of the things that I had always been interested in. I worked at Poets and Writers in New York for many years as well. And I was there in the lead up to and in the aftermath of the 2016 election. And even then, as we were covering environmental issues, sustainability issues, I was watching both my own relationships with people who were not in the same boat as I was at the time from a political standpoint, as well as online discourse just tank completely, right? And it was a scary time because it felt like a rift had kind of opened in some massive way in our epistemic fabric,
Yeah.
So it was scary, and I felt like I was beginning to lose relationships with people that I loved, including people like my father, who is a Republican, and I believe voted for Trump, although I've never asked him explicitly. We just kind of let that lie. And I was also a philosophy major and English major when I was at Muhlenberg College in the mid 90s. So I just kind of noticed that people were no longer able to evaluate arguments anymore, other than based on the identity characteristics of the person that was saying the argument, whether it was because of a political affiliation or sex or gender or race or ethnicity or anything like that. So given that I used to tutor logic when I was in college, and it's something that I feel like is really important to our sense-making apparatus, I just kind of said to myself, what is happening here? And I thought about it and I thought about it and I thought about it, and I was probably going to transition out of there. And I thought, well, I could probably do a quarterly magazine, even with whatever other job that I had to make money. And maybe that could be my contribution to the Sensemaking that needed to happen. So we established the magazine. It took a while to incubate. It took a while to kind of get off the ground, but we launched it in 2019. And it's kind of a podcast in print, right? We do long form articles. Some of it is around specifically Pennsylvania and Philadelphia content, but we also crafted it so that people all over the country could enjoy it and get something out of it. So for me, the framework that we established of it being one part magazine, which is kind of easy to understand and you can hold it in your hand and you know what that is, and you might even subscribe to some. Part of it is a collaborative art project. I'm also an artist, I'm a singer, I'm a writer, I do visual art, I do theater. That's always been a part of my life. And I think it's art and beauty is a really great thing that unites people. So that was another thing, was I was looking for something to anchor the magazine, that no matter what kind of political ideology or framework you were coming from, that was something that you might be able to get into. And in addition to it being a magazine, being a collaborative art project, it was also a social experiment. There was a little bit of a, if we build it, will they come aspect to this, right? So that part was both the most compelling and also the scariest part to me, because when you leap off a cliff, you're kind of hoping that people will catch you. And that's what's happened. There are people all over the country who have subscribed. It's still a relatively small organization, but I think we're ready, in conversations like this and other conversations we'll be having soon, to tell more people about what we're doing and invite them to join the community that we're creating.
That's fantastic. So I'm curious that the people catching you when you fall. So we discussed real briefly before we started that we kind of fall around the same circles where we come from, the Unity movement last year. Do you find that you're touching only kind of that avenue, or are you hitting those people that are stuck in those ideological lanes on both sides?
Well, I think it is important to understand that even when you get out of your own original bubble, you might end up right in another bubble. So I think it's important from a sort of I don't know even how to describe this, as sort of knowledge health or epistemic health, or however you want to call it, that you're exposing yourself to things outside of that, looking for critiques of the people that you follow or the podcasts that you follow or the magazine writers that you follow. And I've really come to understand a little bit better recently that the entire ecosystem that we were just describing is really engaged in a project of citizen sense-making. And I think as long as we all continue to talk to people who have never heard of Unity 2020, have never heard of the Dark Horse podcast or Sam Harris or, Slate Star Codex or something like that, that we translate for people. And so I think that's part of what the magazine is for me, is you don't have to be, I think a lot of the people who have been attracted to the magazine are in that space. But there are also people way outside of it who have never heard of those things, and they're reading it because they love the arts and culture coverage, or we're treating kind of 10,000 foot view media coverage or cultural criticism from a different way that the news sources that they're reading are covering it. So I'm really trying to help people navigate this space, but also have fun while we do it. And, I think it's a great question. We all have to continually kind of say, am I just talking to myself here? But I think that's the beauty of it having expanded beyond this original kind of core group of people, is that we do open ourselves up to other people in other ideological frameworks, other places of the country, across urban-rural divides, across racial divides. And I'm really grateful to the team of people that was the original core group of people, many of whom are still with us at the magazine, including Walter Foley, who is my partner in all things, but is our ideas editor and writes for the magazine, because we need to be able to talk with one another about these things. So, instead of doing a podcast, instead of starting a Substack, although I will start a Substack for Pennsylvania. I'm going to call it Letters from a Pennsylvanian. It's at pennsylvania.substack, but there's nothing there yet. And we're just in the process of sorting through all the information and then on a quarterly basis, wrapping that up in a bow and giving it to people who are subscribers.
Yeah, that's great. And it seems to be a well-made publication down to the material itself. I like the look and feel of the magazine. And going back to your partner, Walter, I think that's one of the articles I specifically hit on. He kind of starts by touching on a gentleman that's following. He takes pictures and videos unedited.
Ford Fisher.
Yeah,
yep.
Ford Fisher, exactly. Mm-hmm. And he goes on, one of the trends of the article, the essay, is about big tech censorship. And it shows how it's dangerous for, people on the left to kind of laugh at the people on the right that are being censored because it's coming for you next. And it highlights how it does. Are you at all worried about, once as you become bigger in this space, being censored yourself, whether it's, online or even places that would distribute, the publication itself?
No, it's a great question. And we're definitely worried about it sometimes from a internal systems standpoint. We had these conversations when we were deciding, do we use Shopify? They just cut off the Red Scare merchandise because of, what have you, or we don't want to do Patreon because they, tossed out a bunch of conservative commentators and it will come for you next. So weirdly, that is one, print is one of the things that can insulate you against that, right? Because we're not being sold in a Barnes and Noble, right? You have to know to go to our website, buy a subscription, and then I mail that to you. So unless you're going to commit a felony and interfere with the U.S. Postal Service, that information is going to get to you. Right.
Okay,
so,
yeah.
I think that's one of the many reasons that we decided to do print. You were commenting before on our print is dead, long live print, which is,
right.
obviously a kind of nod to the Queen is dead, long live the Queen, or the King is dead, long live the King. And it's
right.
this continuity of spirit. I mean, it's a little bit like when the Unity Twitter account was flagged and had to go to a kind of flag bearer sort of status instead of having one account that is the information source for everything. But I think from the print standpoint, print is really never going away. It really isn't ever going away. And there's a lot of confusion about whether or not the rumors of its early demise are true, right? So one distinction that I want to make is that if you are a niche publication, and this would go for some of the titles that I helped shepherd when I was at Red Flag, the guys who subscribe to Decibel Magazine are always going to subscribe to Decibel Magazine because they love extreme metal, right?
Yeah.
If you subscribe to American Woodworker, you subscribe to that because you love woodworking and it's giving you information that you want and that you need and that is being given to you in a format that you can kind of take it in.
Yeah.
It's really the general interest publications that are advertising dependent that are the ones whose business models have collapsed. So I'm really banking on the fact that, that we can get up to the thousands of subscribers that we would need, but we don't need tens of thousands of subscribers. We don't need hundreds of thousands of subscribers. And when you look at the audiences for things like, the Dark Horse, which we just talked about, or you look at the audience for things like Braver Angels and the work that they do, who have 2,500 members in Pennsylvania alone, or the organizations that are beginning to form in Pennsylvania and elsewhere, like FIRE or FAIR or Heterodox Academy. They have tons and tons of people who are interested in this space. And that's not to say anything of the people who just want to subscribe to an arts and culture magazine that serves some of the region that they're in. So I think from a sheer numbers standpoint, we can get there as long as we can hold the line for a couple of years and get the support, that we need. But the reason partially that we want to do it in print is that it's the digital that is killing us, right? It's the digital that is, fouling up the information landscape, and we're destroying the networks that we usually use to make sense of the world together, including our personal relationships. And so we're at this point as a species where we're dealing with this existential, risk. And so, that's just the civic unity being destroyed is kind of the first step. And then it gets worse from there, because during, that regrettable event, you're also basically lining the pockets of all of these actors with whom you probably don't share values, whether that's foreign agents or companies that aren't treating their workers well, or just mercenary agents or straight up disinformation agents that have all kinds of agendas that don't really square with what we as individuals or Americans want. And then, to boot, on top of all of that, we're saying, take all my data. We're like opening up our veins and telling them to take all of our data. And then they control our moods, and they control what we buy, and they control what we see. So the whole thing is just completely messed up. And I think print really kind of helps you get out of that. I mean, if you read Jared Lanier's book, 10 Reasons to Get Off Social Media right now, or you look at the research that Molly Crockett is doing at Yale in terms of how social media mechanisms like the like buttons or the heart buttons really mess with our psychology and our central nervous systems, it will truly scare you straight. So, I'm sort of fine with harm reduction in this regard. Like we said when we started the magazine, that we would use social media, but we wouldn't let it use us. And so that's really sort of where we still stand. And we could probably still use it a lot more just to spread the word. And maybe we will do that. I mean, the staff convinced me to make a Twitter account, but I have no access to it, right? I can't get into it. I don't want access to it. I don't want to be on Twitter. I don't, Walter will go out and kind of forage for things and bring them back to me and be like, we should probably pay attention to this, or maybe look into that. And I'll do it for research purposes. But, even social media apps like Nextdoor that are meant to be helping neighbors, contact other neighbors are just, it's amazing, the vitriol and the negativity and the neighbors who just go on there to shame other people. And I mean, it's just it's a mess. So yeah, I don't want to participate in that as a person, and I don't want a project that I am shepherding to participate in that business model. So we're not out of the digital space entirely. We're not sending messages by passenger pigeon. Our sales and distribution systems are integrated online. But I think that we're not making a digital product. That's not what we're making. And we go through a lot of books. We read a lot of magazines ourselves, and we're guiding people through what some of those more interesting things are. And I think when you're able to pair that information or that knowledge or those authors or those book authors with really interesting art that also helps you kind of read through it, it becomes less of a chore, right? So we keep to 48 pages. It's 48 pages 4 times a year. There are long form articles, yes, but there's beautiful art, in there as well. And it's a community that we're building. So, it's a weird, beautiful magazine. It smells good, and you can have it online.
There's the sales pitch right there. I'd tell you to put that on Twitter, but you don't have access.
I know. I'll have to get my people on that right away.
Yeah, that's great. It's funny. You're right. It is hard to censor this. That's great. Hopefully it survives all forms of censorship, and it should, because it's freedom of speech and freedom of the press almost. Well, it is, yeah. But you remember when Parler was shut down recently, or right after the Capitol riots, right? And Parler was not only kicked off of its app stores, right, but then its literal website was shut down by its website providers. So, I mean, there is that potential down to that level. And geez, I hope not to even alarm anyone or alert anyone to that possibility for you guys. But
right. And I mean, at this point, I would also say that, while some people might find, someone is always going to find something objectionable in what we do, because we are not a left magazine or a right magazine. We're for everyone. So, if you are a super progressive, left-wing, social justice advocate with an ACAB sign in your window, we are going to give you a really humanistic portrait of a Black cop from Brooklyn who believes in community policing and who doesn't agree with you. And if you are a super right-wing person who doesn't think, our LGBT friends are worthy of the same kind of, humanity or respect that we are, I am going to give you a profile of a queer Black artist in Philadelphia and show you his art and show you his full humanity. And you're going to have to hopefully open your heart up a little bit to that. So, I think from a censorship standpoint, there's always the possibility that someone's going to lead some sort of attack on you from one way or the other. But we're going to keep treating people with respect, and we hope that they will treat us with respect. And, when it gets to the point of places like Parler or other places that are being demonetized, deplatformed. I mean, this has happened to Ford Fisher too. Walt chronicles that in the No Gods, No Masters article that he wrote for the Spring Renaissance issue. That's something that's going to have to get worked out at a different, that's above my pay grade, right? It's like, if we get to the point where you can't, as an American, run a business because the banks are ideologically conforming one way or the other, that's a way bigger problem than my little magazine, my weird little magazine that smells good, right? That's like massive, massive things that we need to deal with.
Yeah.
And just on that front too, I would say that, as a point of hope on all of this, that I think I told you I'm a member of Braver Angels, and I've gone through some of their workshops. I attend their debates. April Lawson, who's their national debate chair, is actually going to be one of the guests in an event we're doing on September 30th in Philadelphia. And that is a really wonderful organization, even just because it has broken the distrust that people who generally lean red or generally lean blue have for one another. And one of the common causes that people have, and I know this from talking with my fellow Pennsylvanians at workshops and offline, is that we're all really concerned about the authoritarianism that is presaged by massive amounts of consolidation of power in the big tech industry with the consent and sometimes the urging of the government. That's a really, really scary kind of situation to be in. And I think that concern cuts across ideological divides for sure.
Definitely. Yeah. I think we saw just in the past few weeks, the government basically, championing what Facebook should censor.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So tell us more about the staff within the magazine, and how did you go about deciding who could write for the magazine, and did you have any rules as far as staying ideologically pure or things like that?
Well, I think from an ideological standpoint, I mean, it's very funny. I mean, the first thing I would say is the people that there's great bios up on the website. I'm loath to say people's names because I'm going to miss somebody and then I'm going to feel terrible. But there are some really wonderful writers and people and community organizers who have joined us, originally, and they are, I would say, largely left-leaning, but really open to the possibility that a different conversation needs to happen, because what else are we going to do? We can't keep on with business as usual. And I really value the trust that we have built up to be able to talk about really difficult, delicate issues when it comes to race, or difficult issues when it comes to sexism or misogyny. But it's funny because even though we have up on the website, it's open for contributors. If there are people out there that want to check us out and subscribe and see what we're doing, and then, contribute to the magazine, I'm all for that. And I also hunt periodically on places like the Heterodox Academy blog or the Fire blogs to find people, especially in Pennsylvania. That's how I found someone like Eric Smith, who's a professor of rhetoric out at York College. He's also going to be on the panel for the September 30th event, and he started Free Black Thought, right? So that staff, I think, signed on to the project of civil discourse and of talking about hard ideas. And of knowing that we might not always agree on things, but we are going to choose to talk with each other in a way that helps us better understand where the other person is coming from. We're going to fact check each other with care, but not with malice, on these things.
Fact checkers. Ooh, yeah.
Yeah. And we, if someone cites a statistic, you can bet we're going to have 4 hours of conversation about, maternal death rates or something to do with the media, and really get down into it and understand the difference between the headlines that we have picked up on these things from and what the actual data says. So, I think one of the things we try to do is be really careful about those kinds of things. And some of it is also not political, right? Like, we have a really wonderful contributor that I met when I worked at Poets and Writers in New York. His name is Josh Megan. And I feel like poetry is a really wonderful part of our world. And it's not something that everyone is able to access. So I ask him always to do one poem from the record, one that's more contemporary, and then essays that help us understand why it's important or relevant and where these people are coming from. So I think we're always doing wayfinding and sense making together. But if you go to the submissions page and kind of understand where we're coming from, we say right out, like, we are not interested in pieces that shame or blame or grandstand. And we're kind of left, but we don't care if you are. I had a young writer named Logan Chipkin who he emailed me and he was like, hey, so I know your website says that you're open to everyone, but I'm a libertarian. Is that okay? And, I'm just sad that even saying it outright, people are still so distrustful.
Wow.
There's a libertarian publication that just started in Philadelphia a little while ago called Broad and Liberty. And, it's very critical of the social justice left and of progressives in general. And I reached out to them just to say, hey, we're a publication in Philadelphia too. And totally ignored me at first because they just assumed that I was there to trap them into a conversation about something. So, the editor and Walter and I had lunch the other day and he was like, I'm so sorry. I didn't return your email. I just figured you were another one of those people trying to get me, basically.
Wow.
So, there's still just so much distrust and so much apprehension that I really just want to say to anybody out there who's afraid to check out the magazine, or they're afraid it's going to be full of one thing or the other. It's not, and it's beautiful. And if you want to contribute, I might say no. We have limited space, but there's no harm in reaching out, because what we're, I said at the top, we're really engaged in citizen sense making. That's what we're doing. That's what all of us are trying to do. And we're trying to triangulate, this podcast said this, but then this guy had a critique of this. Well, what does a Matt Taibbi have to say about it? What does Barry Weiss have to say about it? What does Coleman Hughes have to say about it? What are the critiques of Coleman Hughes or Barry Weiss or Matt Taibbi? These are the kinds of things that we're always trying to find, and just helping people understand that it's a process we have to go through, and it actually can be fun. And it's really rewarding when you find that you have more common ground with people than you originally surmised, because that's a hopeful place, right? I mean, I think that's the other reason we're engaged in the work of the magazine, and we're all doing it as volunteers, because we believe in this project, just like you guys believe in the Unity project, for the same reasons. It's very mission aligned.
Yeah, certainly is. And, you rattle off those names. I know every one of them. So you talk, it's crazy. You talk about, how you sat down with those folks from that magazine, and all of a sudden, they could tell that you were honest in what you were trying to do. I sat down with Phil Reeves, actor and policeman and police chaplain, on our last episode. And he kept trying to reiterate that it's all about the one-on-one. It's all about speaking to somebody in person, and not getting too caught up in what a group of people is saying or thinking or telling you to do. And it's so true, right? And we've built up these digital walls behind that we're afraid to peek over and talk to a single person because, well, you're a journalist, so geez, all journalists are left-wing nuts. I can't talk to you, right? Because I'm from Indiana, and we're all right-wing nuts, and we can't have a conversation. It's funny that you're being able to bridge those divides, and both your authors are, coming out as a single person that's that author is speaking to each reader one-on-one, and they're able to probably bring down that digital divide that would normally exist if they were following that person on Twitter. And then also you're also, bridging those gaps, in person with other publications and people, and you have an event coming up, but I'm sure you're probably going to do it there too.
Yeah, exactly. And that was one of the really big bummers about COVID, and the long list of bummers about COVID, right? Is that we really wanted this to be a place where we would build community and have in-person events. And that was just obviously completely impossible. So we did do some in-person events over the course of the first year of the pandemic. But we're doing an event on September 30th in Center City, right across from City Hall. And I think I mentioned before, April Lawson from Braver Angels will be there. Eric Smith, who is the founder of Free Black Thought and also a professor of rhetoric out at York College. I think he's also writing a book right now about a lot of this. And then Dominic Green, who is the deputy world editor for The Spectator, which is a center-right publication. That I subscribe to. That's one of the places that I subscribe to make sure I'm not in an echo chamber. And we're going to have a conversation together in person, hopefully with a live audience. At that time, the regulations are changing every day.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk about, where the mainstream media is getting wrong the idea that people can't talk with one another across these partisan divides. And where we're getting wrong the idea that, for instance, there is a Black way or a woman way of thinking about things. That's clearly not true. And I think we have to start seeking out the voices and the people who are maybe not in the mainstream media yet, who have a different perspective on things. Because I think at the end of the day, what all of these people, and I hope what all of us have in common, is that we know America is not perfect. Right. And we can see, looking, right, left, center, that there are good ideas everywhere. But China's going to eat our lunch if we don't get this figured out. Right. Like, that scares the crap out of me, that we're sitting here fighting with one another and they're, planning for world domination again. They did it once. They can do it again. It's not the first time. Right. And so this is a really serious issue. It's a really serious issue when it comes to tech and AI. It's a really serious issue when it comes to, nuclear disarmament. Those are, I think, the big three that you all, Noah Harari talks about in some of his work, that if we don't have our brains and our people and our passions pointed towards some of these problems together, we are essentially depriving ourselves and denuding ourselves of the thing that has made us a successful species, right?
Right.
Which is, not everybody can know anything, and so we specialize and then we network and we solve problems. And so when these information systems are polluted and when the networks are broken down, we can't solve the problems. And so that's the biggest thing that scares me. And if I can do, a magazine from Pennsylvania that helps correct some of that, cleans up the water a little bit, brings more people into the boat, hopefully we will get to a better place with, me doing it here. I hope there are other folks doing it across the country. I hope more of these conversations break out into the mainstream, and I think they are currently. So we're going to need more people to be able to be translators for all of this.
Yeah, and you need every form of media to hit. Hit everybody's desks and their mailboxes, their email inboxes. It's so funny. It's like we're talking about a print publication. I'll confess, I long ago gave up on print and I subscribed digitally to a lot of stuff. But now I can't get out of my email. Like, it's it's insane. It's crazy. There's so much there. I wouldn't even see something like this if I subscribed. And as the email inbox has gone up, the mail coming to the mailbox has gone down. And so a print publication is actually probably smarter, because that I will remember. I will notice that. I will take the time to sit down and read it versus I avoid my inbox at all costs. And however many people are like that,
Right.
So
yeah, this magazine is not meant to be work, right?
Yeah.
It's meant to be a little eddy or a little oasis where you can get the hell offline for a minute and enjoy something that isn't Twitter trolls and, whatever else you've got to wade through on the internet, your email inbox, your pings from work, your alarms on your phone. I mean, it's really important to our mental health to be able to get away from that, right? So you can have different tools for that. You can tell yourself you've got to go for walks. You can have all kinds of other sort of little, life hacks that you do to get offline. But for me, print has always been that place where I can explore the world without the world imposing on me in any kind of way. It feels to me like one of the freest forms of exploration. And I think more and more about the fact that when I'm reading things online, I'm being tracked. How long did I spend on this article? How long did I look at that ad? What did I go to afterwards? And if you're holding a physical print copy of something in your hands, you can be sure that no bot or spider is crawling around in your head sending that information back to people. So for me, it's about beauty. It's about slowing down. Slow media is another way that we have described it to people. It's the equivalent of a farm to table meal that is meant to be nourishing and beautiful and localized and regional and giving you that context and perspective and community that you don't get when you're just ripping through Substack newsletters or email notifications or what have you.
Yeah, it's funny. You keep touching on the slowness, the long form. So like you likened it to a podcast, which us in this space, for everyone, probably most of our audience listen to podcasts that are like Joe Rogan, the long form, really long, 3 hours, 2 hours, that sort of thing. I feel like that is more of somebody in their late 30s, late 40s and beyond sort of person that is able to slow down and start looking at things like this and spending the time like this. I could be totally wrong. That's maybe my own experience. Do you have any clue about the younger audience you might have or don't have?
I don't have great age demographics necessarily, but I do know from our staff that some of them are younger. And from, it's interesting. Our designer, Michael, who used to be the designer at is the designer at Decibel magazine, just stepped down so that he could do that more full time and fully present. And I was interviewing people for the design positions, and I had a lot of really great conversations. And one of them is a young woman. She's actually designing the fall issue. Her name is Sarah Messina. She's really great. And she's very left. I could tell that from looking at her social media presence and kind of the things that she cared about. But she also said, despite that, and I think this is where some of these kind of stereotypes and low-res versions of people that we kind of concoct in our head is germane, because she also said, but like I've lived in places where there are people who don't think like me. Like I lived in Florida, I lived here. I had to talk with people at the local bar. I'm very interested in hearing actually what other people have to say. And so I think for me, there's a little bit of sort of like curiosity, on the part of some of these younger folks who are saying, oh God, like actually I hate the internet. I hate being connected to this all the time. These sort of digital natives who are going native the other way and saying, like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't have any more social media accounts. I only want to do print. I'm really interested in this. So I think in some ways it's our job as maybe people in the Gen X kind of demographic that you were just talking to, which I'm very squarely in the middle of, to be open to the idea that these people just have to be asked. Right? They just have to be invited in. And it's not that they hate print. It's that they haven't been raised in that world. Right. And to me, print is a really nourishing thing. And I, like I said, it's not going away. And book sales are back, after the original crash of, the Barnes and Nobles and the Borders of the world killing independent bookstores and that kind of thing, they're on the rise again. Like independent bookstores are on the rise. Book sales are up. There's no indication that we can't get to the sales goals that we have to be able to keep this magazine going. I really think that it's just a question of exposing people to it and helping them understand that it's a totally different form of communication and also of taking information in that could be way healthier, not only for us as individuals, but as a community and as a society.
Yeah. Yeah. There's lots of questions I could ask you there about like the likes of Amazon and if you'd ever consider that. But I'm curious. We talked about at the front end. You said you like politics, and I'd really like to say why.
Well, you know what? It was so interesting. I feel like I should probably like update my bio a little bit. I think what I'm actually most interested in is civics. So let me restate that I am into civics, as geeky
Okay.
as that sounds.
What's the difference?
Well, to me, politics is more of the literally the day to day kind of like representative democracy aspect of it, whereas civics to me is like, do you volunteer for your local homeless shelter, right? Do you participate in local activities that make your community better? Do you
Yeah.
pay attention to who you're voting for and why, and make sure that they're people of good character and that would represent you well? I mean, as ridiculous as it sounds, I think I've always been oriented this way. Like when I was in elementary school, I got in trouble for not saying the Pledge of Allegiance because I knew, even as a third grader, that there was a separation of church and state. And so I objected to the one nation under God. Right. And my parents backed me up in that. Right.
That's fantastic.
And, you know, further down the road when I was in high school, we didn't have a women's soccer team. And my mom said, well, Title IX, like we'll do the research, we'll get you set up on the school board agenda, and you know you can make your presentation, you can
Wow.
collect your signatures, find a coach, you know, talk to people, see if you can organize this. And we did, and they said no. At which point my mom called her buddy, who was like the town lawyer. I grew up in like a very small town in Bloomsburg in Pennsylvania. And he was like, yeah, we can sue them if we need to.
Yeah.
You know, my mother was literally counting how much it cost to run the football lights on Friday nights and how much a girls' soccer team would cost in comparison to that. So I've been taught since I was a young person that if you want to see change, you need to be the one to organize it. And so I think for me, I guess that is more what I mean by politics, is understanding your community, knowing what those channels of power are. And then when you go through the channels and the hoops that they told you to go through, like just be a good Democrat, just be a good Republican. And after a while, they no longer serve you. You come up with a different game and don't play theirs anymore.
Well, that's interesting that you were brought up that way. How did you keep yourself from, becoming so you were trying to be an advocate for these things, and, that could have spun off really quick into, well, here's a group, Democrat or Republican, and, oh, they're trying to fight hard against that group. A lot of people do this, right? They become an advocate in their group because it's easy to fight against all the other things that group has wrong. How did you fight against that, or did you have to? And how do we help other younger people as they're, becoming, young people and, going out into the world as professionals, and they're still on social media, those sort of things?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a great question, and I don't know that there's any one answer to it, but I think these groups that we've been talking about, like places like Heterodox Academy, that are saying, okay, we've identified an issue, which is that there is no longer any ideological diversity in many colleges and universities. That's bad because the class of people that are coming out of colleges and universities are the people that we are expecting to be our civic leaders, right? And so if they're being taught what to think instead of how to think, that's a huge problem, right? It's a huge problem. And so I'm really interested in the organizations that are looking at it like that. It's like, what can we do to stop indoctrinating people in whatever way that looks, right? You hold your cup this way or you hold your cup that way. And really trying to get them to understand from an outcomes-based standpoint what they want. And this can't be a zero-sum game. It just can't, right? So, and if you're operating from that position of scarcity where you win and the other guy loses or vice versa, again, this is where the game has to get changed, right? So from a political standpoint, whether it's things like altering term limits or ranked choice voting or other kinds of mechanisms like that that would choose the incentive change the incentive structure that we have. Those are the kinds of fulcrums that I'm looking for, both as a person, as an organizer, as a community member, to say, maybe it is just having an in-person event and getting people to understand, no, they don't think that. And no, that's not what that statistic means. And just bringing the temperature down on the conversation and inviting more people in one by one. I mean, you said at the beginning with this podcast, it's like if you can change one person's mind, right? And it's almost like, it's not even change. It's like if you can deprogram one person's mind from behaving in exactly one way and get them to open up a little bit to a different way of thinking and engaging with the people around them, and engaging in good faith conversation, steel manning people's arguments, like I said, fact checking them in a, listen, brother, I'm just trying to make sure, not in a, I'm trying to get you kind of way. I think those are some of the tools and tricks that we can use with ourselves. And I don't also think that we should stick with the old adage of you can't talk with politics, at the dinner table with your family. I mean, this was I think one of the main last kind of things that happened to me personally was just not being able to talk with my father anymore. The slammed doors and the screaming and the crying and the wailing and the rending of cloth that would go on. And this is the man who raised me. I love him deeply and respect him deeply. And if I finally just said to him at some point, I was like, Dad, if we can't talk to each other, you and I, who love and respect each other, came from the same culture, if we can't do this, we cannot expect Congress to. We really can't. So I think it's going to have to be a kitchen table by kitchen table, person by person, and being able to stand up to, I think, because this is something that also came up in the Braver Angels workshops. It's like being the one that says to your conservative friend or your liberal friend, I disagree. And it's harder to do when you're within a group of people who are within your ideological filter bubble than it is outside of your ideological filter bubble, right? So it's much harder for me as a lean blue kind of person to say to somebody who's way, way left, look, I know that you think that this is the only way to talk about race in America, for instance, but may I introduce you to these other thinkers or writers, okay, maybe check out, some of these other folks, all of whom, you could rattle down the list of, but that's the kind of thing that I think we need to be able to do. And as I've done that, what I have realized is most other people are afraid to say the same thing, right? If you voted for Trump the first time and then his performance or his behavior gave you pause, being able to say, look, I'm out, and these are the reasons. I still love you, Republicans, but I can't handle this. It's not good for the country. The more people who feel comfortable among their friends and family and work groups being able to do that, the more we can solve problems within those ecosystems, and think about it more as a yin yang. It's it's never going to be the case that everyone is a Democrat or that everyone is super conservative. That's never going to happen. We're not psychologically constituted as a species to have one way of thinking about that. So we have to learn from one another where it's important to be conservative and where it's important to be progressive, and have those conversations that are based on what outcome we actually want. We don't want people to be living in desperate poverty anymore, right? We don't want schools that are falling down on the kids' heads like they are in Philadelphia, where they can't drink out of the tap water because it's lined with lead, and it's just really, you can't run a country like that. You've got to figure those problems out, and we have to do that together.
Yeah, it's something I learned, I think, from Jordan Peterson, the 12 Rules for Life, and then watching him discuss that topic. And, he would show the Pareto chart is a thing, and to the victor go the spoils, but we can't get so obsessed with that. We can't forget about the people that are falling off the bottom of the ladder. And it's not purely about, just pull yourself up from your bootstraps and get going. It's there are people that can't even reach the ladder. So it's not that simple. Nothing is. And like you said, we're going to spend all this time fighting amongst ourselves. and we're going to lose sight of things like China's 2049 plan and
Exactly.
world dominance. And, if aliens showed up tomorrow, what, would we even notice? I've heard other podcasters like Lex Friedman ask that same kind of question, and I'm not sure we would. They may already be here, and they may, be kind of laughing at us right now. Who knows?
The coronavirus is laughing at us right now, right?
Yeah.
Like we screwed this up. Like, this alien thing descended on us, and instead of understanding how to fight that, we just went right back to fighting each other.
Yep.
So if that didn't show us that aliens could descend, and we'd instead be pointing our guns at one another, I don't know what will.
And as we approach the 20th anniversary of 9/11, I was thinking about this today. My God, what did we learn? How did we get to here from there in that time?
No, it's something I've been thinking a lot about lately, because I was in New York during 9/11, and it deeply impacted my life in a lot of different ways, in every possible way. I mean, that's actually why it's why I moved out of New York and back to Pennsylvania. It's why I ended up working for a social justice organization and doing environmental work. I just kind of realized that there were really big problems that were, I was kind of not inured to, but ignoring or not really looking at. And it woke me up a little bit. But I have thought about that. It's like, that was 20 years ago. That was me walking over the Brooklyn Bridge, looking over my shoulder at just smoke rising into the air. And I don't know how far we've come. And back to the government overreach and that kind of thing as well. It's like, that also was the beginning of the Patriot Act and all of that kind of thing. So it was in some ways the start of this surveillance culture that we're in now. And so it's only gotten worse. And I think we've got to really get our heads around how to nip that in the bud before it gets any worse.
Yeah. And like you said, deprogram people so they can at least come out and, blink their eyes and see what's in front of them for the first time.
Yeah.
So we're in a time now, we're recording this on August 24th. You're not on Twitter, and you don't subscribe to this. You don't participate in it, you said, social media. And I applaud you for that. But I'm seeing things like Biden is being called out from both the left and the right media about his handling of Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And now Trump's getting booed at his rallies for telling people to get vaccinated. So what in the world?
No, exactly. And I think, one of the other things that was clear talking with other Pennsylvanians about this is that absolutely everyone agrees that our politicians do not represent us, right?
Right.
They just don't. And that has to change as well. And unfortunately, I am not someone who wants to run for office. I don't think I'm constitutionally capable of doing that kind of job. I will stay on the outside of it and try to organize in a different sort of way. But it's unfortunate that, in part because that kind of job is so brutal. I think about it sometimes, and this is where the term limits and other things come in. It's like, I remember Michael Pollan writing in his book, The Omnivore's Dilemma, about the fact that in many cultures, like the person who slaughters the animal isn't the same person always, right? Because you can't give that job to someone day after day, right? I mean, we do in our industrialized society now, which is awful, but that's the way politicians should be too. It's like you shouldn't do that job as a lifelong career. It should be a tour of duty that you have, and then you should get out of it.
Right.
The dynastic way that politics has started to operate is really troubling, and you just go back to Thomas Paine's common sense. Like, this is why we got out of the business of monarchy, right? Because once you have that sort of dynastic approach to politicians and this sort of, you've got to be a lawyer, you've got to have an Ivy League degree, you've got to do all of these things to be in that world, we have people who are no longer connected to the people that they're serving. And that's a really, really, it's a really difficult thing to navigate, but we've got to get out of it. Our country is just not that old. I think there's a lot of people who are like, oh yeah, now we're America, and America will always be here for us. And it's like, no,
nope.
Not even a little. And if you don't think that there's going to be massive amounts of things, beyond the pandemic that we have to deal. We talked about China, we talked about other kinds of existential risk, and who knows what's coming down the pike? Like, we just don't know. And so we've got to get our house in order so that we're not divided against ourselves.
Yeah, we had Dr. Edward Watts on the podcast to talk about his book, The Fall of the Roman Republic. And, a lot of people don't even think of this. When they think of Rome, they think of the empire. Even I think I even heard Joe Rogan mention this a couple weeks ago. He said something like, America is the best society ever made. It's the only republic ever made. He even said that, I think. And I said, whoa, wait, that's not. The Roman Republic was 500 years old before it fell into an empire, into totalitarian government. And so I asked him, I said, do you think there's going to be somebody on some podcast in 400 years from now discussing the fall of the American Republic?
Right. And it absolutely could happen, right?
Yeah.
What did he say?
He said he didn't think so.
Okay.
And I keep talking to people that, say things like that. We had Desh Amelia and talking about his film, Better Left Unsaid. We're going to have him on again. We talked about civil war, the prospects of America falling into civil war. Or are we already there in a digital sort of format? He grew up in Sri Lanka, and he grew up in 20 some years of civil war. So there are these perspectives we can look at that help us to see, well, number one, we're not so bad, but number two, it can get really bad. So, we have lessons that, society and, humans have already learned on how to get there. Let's learn from that. Let's not forget that.
Yeah. And I think one of the important things I would pull out of what you just said is that, who do we want to listen to at this point? Like some rando on Twitter or a historian, right?
Right.
It's like, there's a lot of great information out there in the historic record about how societies fail. There's also a lot of good information on why they work. And so that's a lot of what I try to study. I would recommend, for instance, the book Blueprint by Nicholas Christakis, where he kind of ticks through this suite of things that characterize good communities and good societies where they're functional and work for everyone. And there are things like mild hierarchy so that you kind of know who to go to when things are gone. But one of the interesting pieces of the list is something that I had not thought about, but that resonates with me and seems it tracks with my intuitions, which is good communities or societies are in part characterized by mutual learning, right? So. Yeah. And I think that goes back to what I was talking about before from a kind of biological or evolutionary perspective, which is that's what humans are good at, right? Is that. Yeah. I know how to do this, you know how to do that. And in some of his research, what he was looking at was, in part utopian, experiments and failed experiments, shipwrecks, interestingly enough. Like, how did this stranded crew versus that stranded crew organize themselves? What was the leadership like? And so you can imagine a kind of mini experiment. You would never ethically, like he says in the book, be able to conduct this experiment, but you can study what has happened. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sort of ultimate survivor, right?
Yeah.
But you can imagine, like, you're on a ship and you're in the 17th century or something like that, or 18th century, and on board you've got a guy who can repair rope or riggings, and you've got maybe a metallurgist or a blacksmith, and you've got a cook, and you've got this and you've got that, because it's you're in a self-contained unit, right? Yeah. So there's some really, really interesting anecdotes about the Shackleton expedition in that book that I find really fascinating, where not only were they teaching each other, which would have been also a survival strategy, because what happens when the guy who knows how to repair the ropes dies of an infection, right? He will have passed that knowledge on to another member of the crew. But they also performed together. They had like days where they knocked off of work and did silly skits and sang for one another. And that, to me, goes back to part of the reason why we're doing art and ideas together in the magazine, so that it's not only politics or cultural critique or cultural criticism. It's also art, because that's part of what makes us human too, right? And so we have to get back to, what is it about art? What is it about music? What is it about visual art? What is it about the ways that religion and art are kind of always going to be in that space of how do we have ritual together? How do we have community together? How do we celebrate together? How do we mark births and deaths and times of the year? And those things are really important. And I it actually reminds me of one of the questions that you kind of sent me in advance, which is, I'm a lean blue, although I should probably just put my political affiliation at this point as bi-curious or something like that.
You're an individual. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
But you can lean some way on certain
exactly.
topics or all the time. That's fine. Yeah.
But I think one of the things that conservatives, get right is that they understand the place that religion might fit into a functioning society. And I mean that in a very big kind of way. I don't mean it exclusively in a church going on Sunday, although certainly that's part of it as well. But I think that to me is where the right or conservatives in general haven't thrown that out, right? And I think John McWhorter might be right that, in the book that he has coming out this fall, The Elect, that the social justice left is maybe trying to fill a God-shaped hole there. That we do have a meaning and purpose crisis. We do have radical injustices in this country that need to be remediated, and it feels good to fight for those things, right? And we should be fighting for those things, and we should always be mindful of them. But I think, on the other side of that, I'm glad that people like Sam Harris and some of the other new atheists have sort of backed away subtly from the kind of we must eradicate religious thought and practice because
the
it's
dogmatism.
It's only bad, which is of course its own dogmatism. And for me, not having grown up in a religious household, very pluralistic in that way. I think my parents would say they raised me maybe with, broadly speaking, Christian values, but not as a Christian. We didn't go to church. I grew up in Pennsylvania not going to church, and I thought Jesus was from Pennsylvania because this is where Bethlehem was, right? And my grandmother was really into him,
cute,
so I thought he might be like a part of the family, right? So for me, art has always filled that space.
Yeah.
And fiction has always filled that space. And I think authors and writers like Marilynne Robinson, who I'm a rabid fan of, are so eloquent and also insistent on the point that in this country and in many other countries, but we grind the faces of the poor, is what she says. She has a really beautiful essay that was in, I think, the New York Review of Books or the London Review of Books called Which Way to the City on the Hill. And I think she's right about the fact that no matter where you sit in the political spectrum, this idea that we have to care for the most vulnerable people in our society or the people who are dealing with injustices is really central to being human and to having a values-based framework that we need to work within. And whether you come at that from a community organizing standpoint, a religious standpoint, an artistic standpoint, I don't think matters, but it's a way to keep visible these things and understand and process these things that we have to work through together.
Yeah. Yeah. You have on your website a spot about how you are not necessarily like left-brained or right-brained. You kind of fall dead center on some of those things, right? And
yeah, I'm a weirdo. Toby.
There's a great line that you have about something with spreadsheets and something else. What is it?
Yeah, no, I'm equally likely to like dream in like spreadsheets and also like
yes.
foreign languages. I feel like I describe myself as a type A bohemian, I guess, in that way.
Well, and it's funny when I read that part, I said, holy crap, she's describing me.
Yeah.
So I could run a spreadsheet with the best of them. But then I enjoy music. I play the drums, the guitars, I can draw, those sort of things. Those are my interests. And so I always thought I was a weirdo I never fit into both sides. I'd have people tell me, I should be an IT person. But they didn't even know I played the drums or, things like that on the artsy side. So
right.
It's great to see that, there are others like me. I'm sure there's much more.
I think, it's possible it's a small tribe, but I've always been like that. Like, and, at every nonprofit I've ever run, like I'm the person who's deduping the database and building the relational database and handling the finances and doing all of that. And at the same time, like I'm a writer, I'm a musician, I've acted, I like basically every kind of art that there is. And in the same way that I don't like, the kind of right-left framework that we now have for describing ourselves, because I just don't even think it doesn't work anymore, right? It doesn't mean anything. I don't even know what being a lean left is right now. I really don't. It's like having your blinker in your car on and just going in circles and circles and circles,
That's true. Yeah. I think it's got historical perspectives that you can look back to and see, well, kind of what left is always kind of meant and what right is always kind of meant. But you're right. In this time, we can't really use those terms without getting it mixed up with what everybody thinks about it right now.
Or assigning value judgments to them, right?
Yeah.
So like, I think this is one of the main points that I usually try to make when I'm talking with someone who's in my tribe, when they're saying, we gotta, some poor guy running for the Working Families Party will call my house and be like, we need to get those Republicans out of city council or what have you. And I'm like, I'm sorry, in Philadelphia, like the two Republicans on the city council, they're the problem. Like this is what's holding us back as a city. Like, no, I don't think so. There's something else that's going on, and I don't even think it has to do with politics in some ways. I think it has to do with the fact that we've got systems that are too big for us to navigate and work together anymore, right?
Yeah.
I'm really interested in whether or not the United States will end up kind of being more regional and territorial in the way that it organizes itself. Because I do think more and more that we just have a massive scale problem.
Yeah.
We can't coordinate at this level because we can't trust one another. It all goes back to the trust thing.
Yeah. 360 million totally free people. You're right. And, like people like Sagar and Crystal Ball that were on the Hill, which was kind of an independent news source in its own, but they left that because they felt they wanted to be even more free than that. And they started breaking points. And they talk about this a lot. It's like they think that little segmented audiences like that is the norm. And it's not that we need to bring everybody to watch everything. It's just, you're going to have these little segmented audiences. And you see that in the voting data when, there are the national elections. You see that the red and blue counties are not necessarily divided in a state. They are all together, and it's literally your neighbor. It's down to your neighbor is red, you're blue, maybe. It's way too interconnected.
Well, and the other thing I think, speaking of being in bubbles, like there are people who never think about politics, right? So we need to think about that, right?
True.
There are people out there who just absolutely never think about politics. It's not part of the air that they breathe. And this goes back to the specialization part. So, for me, it's like, I don't want to be in politics directly. I'm happy to advise people who are in politics or give good counsel or that kind of thing. But I feel like my job is translator. That's my job. I'm a white woman who has worked at a lot of Black-led organizations and in cities for a really long time. I am a Gen Xer who is right in the middle of all of these generational sort of divides. I grew up in a really rural place, but I've lived in cities for the last 25 years. I could go down the line in the ways that those things can divide people, but I think that's the place that I'm supposed to be, and that's why I'm happy to be working on the magazine, because it's a way that I can do that and kind of give people a breather and give them a way into some of these conversations in a less combative way.
That's great. Well, if you don't mind, you kind of already answered one of these questions, but if I could ask you kind of our other unifying questions before we sign off.
Yeah.
So one of them was that, we believe in highly capable, courageous, and patriotic leaders. That was kind of one of the goals of the Unity movement. Do you have anyone in mind that meets that kind of criteria, maybe locally, nationally?
Now, it's so hard to come up with an answer to this question, and so
Could be somebody nobody knows. Yeah.
Well, exactly, and I would say that I think for sure I'm friends with State Representative Leanne Kruger. I think she's doing a great job in Pennsylvania and understands that the economic health and environmental health of the state are really important, and that they don't need to be in constant battle with one another. And then only because he just threw his hat in the ring for the Senate race here in Pennsylvania. Conor Lamb, who is out in southwestern Pennsylvania, I think is a really interesting person. He's a Democrat, but he really understands Pennsylvania, right? And he understands that you're not going to get elected in Pennsylvania by saying that you're going to, run roughshod over the Second Amendment, or by talking about things that are way outside the kitchen table issues that Pennsylvanians are worried about. And and he's a military veteran. He's a Marine, former Marine. So Veterans Affairs are very important to him. But he's still an environmental advocate, and he's still a proponent of the arts. And I think that's exactly the kind of person who, like me, understands this is the way that the state functions, and it's okay if it's not radically one way or the other. So I think he's a really interesting person. I mean, he will probably give John Fetterman a run for his money, but Fetterman has also amassed quite a war chest. So they're both super interesting candidates. I mean, Fetterman's an interesting guy as well. But one of the things that I'm most interested in about the state that I live in right now is that it is so emblematic of America. We have rural and we have urban, and we've got some extreme poverty and we've got some extreme wealth, and we are in the middle of a reckoning with our manufacturing past and trying to understand how to give people good jobs without ruining the environment. I'm really excited to be talking soon with a woman who's a fifth generation coal mining family who is converting some of the land that her family owns to solar.
Wow.
Having also grown up in an energy family, my father ran a nuclear power plant when I was growing up. So that's, power, whether that's political power or energy is really interesting to me. And all eyes will be on this Senate race, and we're going to be awash in outside money, just like we were when Toomey and Katie McGinty were facing off against each other. So super, super interesting. But I love the state. I love the people here. I think, when I talk with the folks that I'm engaged with and hear what their hope for the state is, whether they're coming from a left or a right perspective or a red or a blue perspective, down the line, they want Pennsylvania to be a model for the rest of the country on depolarization and civic discourse and figuring out our economics and figuring out how we can provide better good jobs for people, better education opportunities for people. That's what we need to be focused on, and I think that Pennsylvania can do it. So that's my cheerleading for my home state.
That's great, and I'm glad you went local and talked about your state, even if they are, national representatives. It's like I say this a lot. It's like, what power does the president have in your daily life? It's very little usually when you talk about it. Maybe it's getting worse, but your state and local representatives have most of the power to affect your daily life. Yeah, that's great.
And I raised money for Katie McGinty when she was running, and we've never had a female senator from Pennsylvania, so that's to our shame. And I hope that sometime we will have someone there. But there are also people like Leanne who are like, no, I'm staying here. I want to make things right here, because she kind of has the same sort of framework that you were just discussing. And I think for me, being in the media space, I definitely don't consider myself a journalist necessarily. I mean, I am an editor. I have a publication, but I don't even know what that means anymore, given the state of where we are with journalism. But it is something that we can use as an organizing tool, and our media can't any longer be focused only in New York or in LA either, right? Because in the same way that you've got this sort of tyranny that happens when our politicians are either economically stratified or from an education standpoint no longer connected to the people that do the work in the state, right? People in my family who are masons or mechanics or carpenters, those are the folks that are building things, and they don't always think the way that you do, and that's okay. But we have to all work together to figure this out. And if our media is as disconnected from day-to-day life and reality in places like Pennsylvania, then we're going to have the same problem. So that's really the other reason I'm committed to doing a journal that is, open to having subscribers all over the country, like the New Yorker does, but really interested in exploring how better we can serve the state and the region in a way that I don't think is happening right now.
Well, that makes sense. And, it sounds like you're championing that idea that Pennsylvania should be the model. So I see that in your writing and in the essays that it's, you mentions local Pennsylvania, Philadelphia a lot, but it also touches on national topics that, goes, it's relevant everywhere, is I guess what I'm trying to say.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm not here to pretend to be a New York media star, right? Like, I'm a country girl from Pennsylvania. So that's who I am, and that's what I do. And I love being in the city as well. And can't we all just get along?
Well, that's the last question is, what's the most important thing we can do to bridge the vast political divide? But be you is the answer. I mean, gee, from the time, what did you say, you were 9 when you were trying to, or no, it was Title 9, but you were very young trying to get the soccer team.
Opting out of the Pledge of Allegiance, yeah.
Opting out of the Pledge of Allegiance.
I hope that doesn't
grade.
paint me as unpatriotic. It really was a
well, as long as you didn't take a knee, you're okay.
But it's fine if you do. I mean, this is the thing, right? It's like, we have to be able, to answer your question. We all live in this country, right? We all live here. It belongs to all of us. And it belongs even to the people who are not yet citizens and who are on that path. They are part of our civic fabric and part of our economic drive as well. And we need to have more vision. Like, I think we're seriously lacking in leadership and vision, which is, I think, one of the things, obviously, that the unity movement is trying to help identify. Like, who are the leaders? You go back to Mr. Rogers, like, who are the helpers? Look for the helpers when things are bad.
Yeah.
But I think we have to start really listening to people and not making value judgments when they protest a particular way or when they navigate a particular issue or particular way. And I think we need to do a really massive reset on understanding what our common values are and understanding that most of the time what we're having a fight about is a misunderstanding that the other side doesn't share your values and that they're somehow subhuman and that they're not patriotic, they're not family oriented, they're not this, they're not that. They are. Like, I don't know almost anyone who doesn't love their children, right?
Yeah.
And you're going to tell me that most people are not family oriented in that way? Like, we haven't set all of them up for success, and we need to work on that. But we have to listen. We have to ask questions rather than trying to convince. And I think we need to just be open to the fact that we're not always right and have a little bit of intellectual humility. And that's a massive part of what we all need to do. Myself included on a daily basis. Like, where am I wrong? How could I be wrong? Who can I talk to that will show me how I'm wrong? And ask those questions. And if we can do that, I think we'll be in a much, much better place.
Wow, we should record that as the script for the answer to that question and have people just do it that way. So that was great. Yeah, there's so much more that brings us together than divides us. And there is so much more information that we'll never know than we think we know now.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And shout out to Unity, and the movement and like everything that you guys are doing and all the amazing volunteers who are working on this, because this is the thing. Like, this is how it works. This is the civic stuff that I said I was into. I love people who get passionate about stuff and come together and share skills and resources and try to move the needle on something important. So I'm a big fan of what you guys do. I'm really happy to have been able to talk with you today, and I'd come back anytime for another conversation.
Fantastic. We will definitely take you up on that offer and bring you back. So we can mention rootquarterly.com, right? Mm-hmm. People can see the website there and sign up for the publication. Get it quarterly, right? Yep.
And if you're in or near Pennsylvania, we're doing an event on September 30th. where we will talk about these issues and get in a room together and kind of sort through some of these things. So you can also sign up for that on the website. And like I said before, even though I haven't, it won't really launch until the spring, but I'm going to do a Pennsylvania Substack newsletter to talk more about these things. I think I may actually, don't tell anybody, I might write a book about Pennsylvania. I might write a book about Pennsylvania growing up here and some of the issues that we just talked about, because I'm really interested in the way that this state can be a model for other states. So that's on the back burner too. But my mind is starting to churn about the lessons that can be learned there and what the vision for both, my state and the country might have.
Fantastic. Yeah, we'll have to have you on and talk about that book when it's published. Yeah. Yeah. And maybe we can turn Twitter around. So let's send people there too. It's at Root Quarterly on Twitter, right? Mm-hmm. I think. And we can turn it around. You never know.
I believe you that's our Twitter handle. Let me just say that. Yeah.
It is. I have it up here.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. Heather, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Toby. It was really fun to talk with you.
You as well. And we'll have you on again very soon. Good luck with Root Quarterly and your team there. And good luck with the event. We'll try to get all the details on our episode description. Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much.
All right. Good night.
Thank you for watching the Unity Now podcast. We'll be back with another conversation that highlights the political middle ground to unite Americans and end the ideological war. In the meantime, we'd love to hear from you. Please comment below and hit that subscribe button.